Coming up tonight, new business alert. The financial secretary says 60,000 business licenses will be approved by next month. Find out why he's confident they'll meet that timeline. Plus, a human rights advocate says the Bahamas is running out of time to meet its international obligation to criminalize marital rape. And a popular pastor releases a new book that details his journey from the streets to the pulpit and how he's mentoring others to stay on the straight and narrow. Weekend edition. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Megan Shepard. By the end of March, Financial Secretary Simon Wilson says he expects that 60,000 business licenses will be approved. That after Economic Affairs Minister Michael Halkitis said earlier this week that up to February 22nd, 13,000 of those licenses had been approved and an additional 5,000 plus were waiting payment. That 60,000 will surpass the 2022 figure.
At this pace, we probably will approve close to 60,000 licenses by the end of March. Last year we did 50,000, so we really ramping up the efficiency and the productivity to get business licenses out.
For those who have said the process was much more tedious this year than in previous years, the financial secretary had this to say.
This year, we went through an exercise to verify the information a bit more. In previous years, they might have this approved with a view that they'll do an ex post analysis. This year, we try to do some analysis ex ante, where we ask a couple questions just to verify if the information was being presented was correct.
Meantime, Economic Affairs Minister Michael Halkitis hitting back at critics who oppose the government's business license renewal plan. He says those critics, particularly the opposition, should remember their actions when they were in government.
They need to be reminded. For example, I issued a statement yesterday about this issue of businesses providing an assessment number or the location of their business and the name of their landlord, right? We had the former Minister of State for Finance saying that, the government needs to do away with that, when in fact, the very same individual was Minister of State for Finance when the FNM implemented in June 2021 a much more, dare I say, draconian amendment to the Business License Act, where they were in fact putting the onus on the tenant to make sure that the landlord was paying the real property tax.
Halkitis thanks the public for their patience and warns them of what he calls political pandering.
There's a whole lot of political pandering going on, all right? They know what they implemented because of the problems that they had. We have taken a much softer approach. And so, all I can say is unfortunately that's the nature of our political opposition, is that they say things without even being reminded of what they did a few short months ago when they sat in the very same chair.
The option of staying in an Airbnb is becoming a much more popular alternative for travelers. But just how much does that sector contribute to tourism and the overall economy? Well, Economic Affairs Minister says they're looking to regulate that industry.
We are looking in conjunction with the Ministry of Tourism to ensure that they come more into the formal sector, so to speak, which is Ministry of Finance speak to say, make sure they pay. As it stands now, we are collecting on the fee that is paid to the Airbnb. We're seeking to move to bring them, into the net, so to speak.
He says they're also looking at ways for those in the Airbnb sector to have the same access to the concessions that some of the major hotels have.
Because that has been a complaint. The hotel are complaining that these people are eating into their business, but the flip side of that is, okay, if we want to tax them on the total, we should also be looking at how can we make concessions available to them, and that's what we're studying as well.
Coming up on our News Weekend edition, a Bahamian makes history by becoming the first black man to lead the United States Golf Association. And the Rand's Memorial Hospital partnering with several organizations to give the gift of life through their A Pint of Love blood drive. That's coming up when our News Weekend returns.
Whether you're battling a chronic condition or offsetting a new injury, Doctors Hospital's comprehensive rehab services offer the help you need now.
Go to doctors.
3 advanced facilities at Collins Avenue, Carmichael Road, and Cable Beach means your personalized plan for care is just a visit away. From physiotherapy to occupational therapy and speech and language pathology, our team approach is all about rebuilding together. For a full list of services, visit doctorshosp.com/rehabilitation. Doctors Hospital, trusted and best care now. Isn't your health worth it?
When we run because we can. We leap because we're free. And we push because it's what we do best. Our TV, home of the 50th Carifta Games.
Welcome back. Newly elected Vice Chairperson and Rapporteur of the UN Human Rights Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Marian Bethel, insisting the Bahamas must meet its international obligation to criminalize marital rape. Jasmine Brown has her candid comments in this report.
The Bahamas has obligations, international obligations under this convention to comply with the convention in every way.
That's the Bahamas representative on the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Marian Bethel, detailing why it's more important the Bahamas meets its commitments sooner rather than later. Bethel says the issue must be on the government's agenda before the next meeting in May, as she believes criminalizing marital rape is long overdue.
Yes, I'm aware that the government has to appear before the Human Rights Council in May of this year, and I would wager a bet that legislation must be in place before then, and that is too long as far as I'm concerned. So yes, I really would like to see it happen several years ago, but now is the time. You know, there ought to be no further delay on this question.
While the Bahamas has committed to criminalizing marital rape, successive administrations have failed to tackle the issue. In 1993, the Bahamas ratified UN's CEDAW agreement. The criminalization of marital rape is one of the commitments contained in the convention.
The Bahamas appeared before the CEDAW committee in 2018 under the leadership of Frank. Campbell, Minister Frank Campbell at the time. And so during this period, the Bahamas was interrogated, and there was a conversation about what were the challenges in complying with the CEDAW Convention and what were the successes. And so the Bahamas has to account every 4 years under this convention.
Bethel's comments comes after she took up a new post during the 84th session of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW Committee. Reporting for Our News, I'm Jasmine Brown.
Thanks, Jasmine. Meantime, an evening swim turned deadly for a 49-year-old man after he was struck by a jet ski. The incident happening just before 6 p.m. on Saturday. Police say the victim was swimming near the shoreline on Paradise Island when he was struck. The victim suffered a serious head trauma, and the man riding the jet ski fled the scene. The victim was taken to hospital for further medical care, but he later died due to his injuries. Police say they are following significant leads in this incident. Police are also investigating a string of armed robberies that occurred between Friday night and early this morning. The first happening around 11:30 p.m. on Friday near Blue Hill Road South. That's when a man was reportedly approached by someone he knew. Police say the suspect pulled out a gun and robbed the victim of a cell phone and cash before running from the scene. The second incident occurred shortly after 2 p.m. in western New Providence. The victim in this crime was a was at a bank when a black-colored Nissan vehicle pulled up. A masked gunman got out and he was robbed of a deposit bag filled with cash. In the third incident, a woman had just arrived at her Kennedy subdivision home around 1:50 a.m. when she was approached by two masked gunmen who ordered her out of her car before stealing it. Police are appealing to anyone with information to contact them at 502-9991 or Crime Stoppers at 328-TIPS. A local pastor is looking to recruit more hands in the fight against gangs, violence, and crimes committed by young people. Senior pastor Dave Burrows says following the Jerome Avenue massacre, he knew he had to do more, and his latest book, Reaching the Streets, was birthed.
It talks about strategies that we have used that worked and how others can learn from our experience and how these strategies can equip them to find success in accessing, engaging, and mentoring troubled youth.
Pastor Burrows says Bahamians need to return to the village mentality where everyone is their brother's keeper. He says to make an even greater impact on the youth, more positive role models must pitch in.
There are very, very few persons who are working in that arena. And I think one of the problems is that most people don't know what to do. Many times people want to help, but they don't know what to do. They feel maybe the task is too daunting. So this book is about, here are some strategies that you can use. Here are some things that work. We give a lot of examples of programs that work, of strategies that work. And we also dispel a lot of myths.
One of those myths, he says, is that troubled children are a lot more different than the average child.
You hear a name, so you hear a street name, so you hear a name like Scarface, and immediately you get afraid because that name is associated with certain things. You talk to his mother, and his mother said he's a good boy. And we look at it and we said, this woman is crazy. But the truth of the matter is, she doesn't know Scarface. She knows if his name is John Thomas, she knows John Thomas. So what happens is that we have to learn that in most cases you're dealing with two people.
Pastor Burrows says one of the key strategies he recommends is building relationships. He says it's important to reach troubled children where they are and participate in their interests.
You mentor a young man in how to play basketball. In the process, he's going to ask questions. If you are a good role model, he's going to look up to you. So it changes the narrative for him. He may be in a community where all he sees are gang members and all of his role models are negative. And then you come along and you say, hey, come, let's go play basketball. And you play basketball and he looks at you, he sees that you have a family, he sees that you're working, he sees that your life is in order, he sees his friends getting shot, getting killed. And he looks at it and he says, well, you know, maybe I need to follow this guy, or maybe I need to ask him some questions.
Still to come, find out how the Ministry of Health and Wellness plans on helping those struggling with mental illness. That story and more coming up after the break. Welcome back. The Rand's Memorial Hospital partnering with several organizations to give the gift of life through their A Pint of Love blood drive. Deputy Hospital Administrator Leotha Colby says the demand is greater than you might imagine.
On a scale from 1 to 10, I would say the demands for blood is at least 10.
House officer at the RAND, Gregory Cooper, adding that they want to educate the public on how blood donations work. Meantime, lab manager Claudia Glinton breaks down why consistent donations are so important.
Our goal is to try to educate the Bahamian population as much as possible on the purpose of blood donation, because blood can't be made anywhere. We can only get it by donation.
We have many patients, many different illnesses, sickle cell patients, cancer patients, patients in surgery, and they all need blood. And we need a continuous supply of blood. Blood only lasts 35 days, so we need to continually replenish the blood bank.
The Ministry for Grants Bahama also partnering with the hospital. Minister Ginger Moxie says she is pleased to see so many residents supporting the initiative.
We want it to become a norm, and like many of the doctors had indicated earlier, after 3 months you can donate again. And so we want to see it as a continuous effort.
The Royal Bahamas Police Force also turning out in large numbers to support, bringing the newest recruits as well as participants who are a part of the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture's National Youth Guard. Officer in charge of the Police Training College, Assistant Superintendent Randall DeVoe.
In our line of work, we see a lot of persons who lose blood, persons who find themselves in traffic accidents and the like, and which better way to help, not only helping in our line of work, but giving back where the hospital will have a large supply of blood or a supply of blood that we can assist. That's no problem. We saw it fitting for us to come and do just that.
A recent increase in mental health patients is cause for concern, which is why the Ministry of Health and Wellness is looking at ways to lend some much-needed assistance to those struggling with mental illness. Jamila Mizik reports.
The Ministry of Health and Wellness is expanding its mental health program. Press Secretary Clint Watson revealing as much, as he says unfortunately the demand and need for assistance has grown in the country.
Minister Michael Darville is going to be announcing soon a new program in mental health wellness and a campaign as well, so that people can know where they can reach out to and who they can reach out to get help. We do know that there's private practice, but that can be costly, and so the government is working to set up. We do have people now with the Ministry of Health and Wellness who are there to provide counseling. We have partnerships with some organizations to do that, but a real robust program is going to be announced soon in regards to that. He was finalizing it. They've been meeting on it and discussing it, and we expect to hear that soon.
Watson adding that the Ministry of Health and Wellness is trying to get an understanding of how many Bahamians are dealing with mental health issues.
What they've been trying to do is, as people come in, document it. As people go for medical health checkups or other things, to try and be able to understand where people are in that regard, and hopefully back it up with the numbers. You're very right. The challenge we've had in the years past is data. We don't know. We don't know. And being able to understand how much this impacts our society is very important.
But he says the stigma attached to mental illness must be addressed.
The reality is people struggle. And so there has to be robust programs to remove stigma from it. And that's something the Ministry of Health is working particularly on, especially coming out of the pandemic, where we recognize that there has been increased cases and concerns because of what people went through mentally in the pandemic. So that's coming on soon, and we're going to continue to keep the pressure on because we have to address it.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Jamila Mizik.
Thanks, Jamila. And just after the break, find out how the National Hotline for Crisis Intervention is helping clamp down on child abuse. And our weekend weather report to wrap up. Will the sunny and clear skies continue into the week? Stay tuned to find out on Our News Weekend Edition.
When we run because we can. We leap because we're free. And we push because it's what we do best. Our TV, home of the 50th Carifta Games.
Welcome back. Thanks so much for sticking with us. The key to meeting your budgeting goals this year may be the 50-20-20-10 rule, according to one financial advisor. RF Bank and Trust Security Investment Advisor Tishria Johnson breaks down the financial hot tip on this week's episode of the Rewind podcast.
And so you're talking about that 50-20-20-10 rule, because they have income coming in, they should definitely have bills coming in at this point. So 50% goes to their loans, any debt.
Now be sure to catch the full podcast on the Our News official YouTube and Facebook pages. The National Hotline for Crisis Intervention is a 24/7 hotline for a number of issues, including urgent housing assistance, counseling, suicide prevention calls, and more. But one of its biggest roles is being a hotline for reporting child abuse. Ann Edwards is the Assistant Director with the Department of Social Services with responsibility for the Children's Services Division. She explains how it all works.
We are guided by the Child Protection Act of 2009, and there is mandatory reporting for matters of child abuse. And so it is important and very paramount that persons report, even if they suspect the little knowledge that they have. They are to reach out to the Department of Social Services, and we will conduct our investigations. All calls are kept anonymously. We do not reveal the names of persons who contact us with any information. Our role is to ensure that we get the information, we can go in and do the investigation to ensure that that person is receiving the necessary help or a child is not at further risk.
But hotline volunteer and chief social worker with the Department of Social Services, Shauna Lee Lewis, says sometimes vague language can make it hard for a situation to be investigated.
For example, somebody may call and say that I hear a child crying all night. I don't know the name, and that's fine, but if you can give us a detailed address. And so oftentimes they'll say, okay, it's somewhere off East Street, so persons can take the time out to at least provide us with enough information so that we can actually make the necessary intervention. That would be greatly appreciated.
There are just a few hours before the start of the work week. Check out the weather forecast to see how best to plan the week ahead. Bahamian Fred Perpall taking up the top post in the United States Golf Association. He was elected as the USGA president on Saturday, becoming the first black man to hold the position in the 128-year history of the organization. The 47-year-old, who currently lives in Dallas, Texas, was nominated in December and will serve a 3-year term. Perpall played basketball and ran track. He was also a member of the 1994 Bahamian national basketball team. And congratulations to him from the Our News family. Thank you so much for joining us for Our News Weekend Edition. On behalf of the entire team, I'm Megan Shepherd. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.